Okay, turn in your books to the equip questions for chapter 10. I would like to remind you of one thing. I'm on page 72. Here, little ladies. You have a quiz tomorrow over chapter 10. It will go well for all of you if all of you complete your study guide. Everybody got that for me? It will go well for all of you if all of you complete your study guide. Just trying to decide if I'm going to say something. Your study guide. And try. Hopefully you already do. But if you don't, give it a shot. Okay? Number 5. Did we go over 1 through 4? Yes. Okay. Provide some evidentiary facts, so evidence, that demonstrate the Gospel of Luke to be a trusted document in what it records. So, what's some evidence from Acts and from Luke? Or actually, it says Gospel of Luke. So just Luke. Specific what? Rulers, yep, and that have been corroborated by other historical accounts, right? Yeah. What else? Yeah. Gives specific years when things took place. What else? Yes.
Mentions Jesus wanting blood.
In Luke, yeah, he's the only one that mentions the hematidrosis is what it's called, and it's a medical condition that under extreme duress, the capillaries in your forehead, which are very close to your skin, kind of burst and you sweat drops of blood. Why do you think Luke is the only one that would tell us about that? He was a medical doctor. And if you ever talk to somebody who's a medical doctor or wanting to become a medical doctor, if you talk to Rachel Smith, right? She loves that stuff. She was not only our basketball manager, she was the trainer, right? Like girls would go over and go, so my shins are hurting, and she's like, oh yeah, I'm all over that, right? And that was Luke. This was something that was interesting to him and different, and so I think that's why he's the only one that reports it. So one thing that sometimes overlooked, Luke is the predecessor, right, of Acts. It's a 2-part series, Luke and Acts. And Acts has been, which is a factual book. It's a travel log. It's a history book, right? And Acts has been proven to be accurate. So we would expect Luke to be accurate, right? Same author, same idea. It's a book of history. It's a book of what happened. And then, as you mentioned, details of people and specific dates are given. And here's the thing. Let's say you were asked to write a paper about, your own personal history, right? And you decide, well, I don't really want them to know when this happened, so I'm going to change the dates a little bit. I'd like to be older. I'm going to change my birth year. And you change some of the facts. Are you going to get away with that? No, somebody like your brother or sister, somebody you know, just be like, you weren't born in 1985, right? They're going to know those facts. Luke could have never gotten away with his gospel or Acts because there were eyewitnesses still alive that would have known that those facts were true. Now, all these many years later, we can show through comparing to other sources that they are true. Another one that you didn't mention is that archaeological evidence corroborates the gospel. And so do historical records, like Josephus corroborates the gospel of Luke. So that I mean, I don't know that there's any ancient writing outside of the Bible that has better attestation than Luke and Acts. Provide some evidentiary facts that demonstrate the Gospel of John to be be a trusted document in what it records. Yep, accurate topographical things. He also says things like he calls the Sea of Tiberias, calls the Sea of Galilee the Sea of Tiberias, which is what it would have been called when he was writing it. Right? He probably knew it as the Sea of Galilee, but he was writing to more than just Jews, and so he called it what they were calling it at the time. And so there are numerous historically confirmed facts and archaeologically confirmed facts in John's Gospel, including like the distance between Bethany and Jerusalem, and just any number of things in the Gospel. Okay, so that was what you did for yesterday. Now, if you would please open your books to page 269. Historical crosshairs. Now, raise your hand if you're a non-hunter. You don't hunt. I do not. Raise your hand if you are a hunter. What are crosshairs, Lucas? Yep, so you're looking through the scope, and there's this part in the center where the lines cross, and that's your perfect place where you want to put it, okay? So this is historical crosshairs. We're zooming in on the exact place. Let's review what we found so far. By looking at just a few New Testament documents, John, Luke, and half of Acts, we have found more than 140 details that appear to be authentic, most of which have been historically confirmed, and some of which are historically probable. If we investigated the other New Testament documents, we would probably find many more historical facts. Time and space does not permit us to embark on such an investigation. But what we have found from just John, Luke, and Acts is certainly enough to establish the historicity of the basic New Testament story, the life of Jesus, and the early history of the church. But there's even more evidence of historicity. The New Testament writers put historical crosshairs into their accounts by referencing real historical figures and their doings. All in all, there are at least 30 characters in the New Testament who have been confirmed as historical by archaeology and non-Christian sources. For example, Matthew mentions independently confirmed historical figures, including Herod the Great and his three sons, Herod Archelaus, Herod Philip, and Herod Antipas. Matthew also describes the man Herod Antipas killed, John the Baptist, Baptist, chapter 14, introduced in chapter 3, along with the two women who instigated the killing, Herodias and her daughter. Mark tells the same story about Herod Antipas and John the Baptist, and Luke extends the biblical citations of the Herodian bloodline by mentioning Herod the Great's grandson, Agrippa I, the king who killed James, John's brother, and his great-grandson, Agrippa II, the king before whom Paul testified. Pilate is a prominent figure in all four Gospels and is cited by Paul. This same Pilate appears on several occasions in two of Josephus's works, Antiquities and the Wars of the Jews, and is identified in an ancient inscription as the prefect, the governor of Judea. This archaeological discovery was made in the Israeli coastal town of Caesarea in 1961. It was a great year, by the way. And it was actually 60 years ago. In addition to Pilate, Matthew, Luke, and John specifically name another leader who figured prominently in Jesus' death, the high priest Caiaphas, who sentenced Jesus to die. Caiaphas is not only mentioned by Josephus, but his actual bones were discovered in a fantastic archaeological discovery in 1990. This discovery was made possible by an ancient burial practice of the Jews. And there's a list of people who have been confirmed either through other sources or archaeology. From about 20 BC to AD 70, the Jews had a custom of exhuming the body of an important person about a year after his death. So going back into the tomb to retrieve that body, and then placing the remains in a small limestone box called an ossuary. In a tomb located to the south of Jerusalem, several of these ossuaries were discovered, one of which bore the Aramaic inscription Yehoseph bar Caiaphas, Joseph, son of Caiaphas. Inside were bones of an entire family, 4 young people, an adult woman, and a 60-year-old man. The man is very likely the former high priest Joseph Caiaphas, and the same man who Josephus identified as the high priest, and the same man the New Testament says sentenced Jesus to die. So now we not only have non-Christian written references to the high priest at Jesus' trial, we also have his bones. And notice that there's only a 50-year window. Like if you find anyone in an ossuary, they died some point between 70, so 90-year period, BC to AD. So they died in that 90-year period, and they're very old. As Table 10.1 illustrates, there are several other New Testament figures confirmed outside the New Testament. These include Quirinius, Sergius Paulus, Gallio, Felix, Festus, Augustus Caesar, Tiberius Caesar, and Claudius. What else could the New Testament writers have done to prove that they were eyewitnesses who were not making up a story? The New Testament, a historical novel or a novel history? A novel meaning unusual, a new history. In spite of these 140 plus eyewitness details and 30 plus references to real people, a hardened skeptic might say, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the New Testament is true. Suppose it's a historical novel, fiction set in a real historical context, something similar to a Tom Clancy novel. There are many problems with this theory. First, it can't explain why independent non-Christian writers collectively reveal a storyline similar to the New Testament. If the New Testament events are fictional, then why do the non-Christian writers record the same, some of them as though they actually occurred? Second, it can't explain away why the New Testament writers endured persecution, torture, and death. Why would they have done so for a fictional story? More on this on the next chapter. Third, historical novelists usually do not use the names of real people for the main characters in their stories. If they did, those real people, especially powerful government and religious officials, would deny the story, destroy the credibility of the author, and maybe even take punitive action against them for doing so. As we have seen, the New Testament includes at least 30 actual historical figures who have been confirmed by non-Christian sources, and many of these are prominent and powerful leaders. Finally, since the New Testament contains multiple independent accounts of these events by 9 different authors, the historical novel theory would require a grand conspiracy over a 20 to 50-year period between those 9 authors who were spread all over the ancient world. This is not plausible either. In fact, they couldn't just text each other, right? In fact, the assertion that the New Testament events are part of a grand conspiracy exists only in novels. In the real world, such assertions are crushed by the weight of the evidence. The New Testament, one source or many? Wait, the skeptic might protest. You might have eyewitness testimony, but you can't believe the New Testament because it's from one source. They are not multiple independent accounts, as you say. This is a common error skeptics make because they fail to distinguish between the Bible as a religious book and the historical documents that comprise the Bible. When considering the historicity of the New Testament, we constantly must remind ourselves that the New Testament we see in the Bible is a collection of largely independent writings from the pens of 9 different authors. It was not written or edited by one person or by the church. While the New Testament writers describe many of the same events and may even draw material from the same earlier sources, the evidence indicates that the New Testament documents contain several lines of independent eyewitness testimony. How do we know we have independent eyewitness testimony? Because 1, each major author includes early and unique material that only eyewitnesses would know. And 2, their accounts describe the same basic events but include divergent details. Why are divergent details important? Because if the accounts were all from one source or a single editor, there would be harmonization, not divergent details. When early accounts tell the same basic story but include divergent details, historians rightly conclude that they have independent eyewitness accounts of an actual historical event. The story certainly cannot be made up because independent sources could never invent the same fictional story. By these criteria, we know that John and Mark are independent, and we know that Luke and Matthew differ enough from Mark and from one another to be the products of independent attestation as well. So there are at least 4 independent sources for the basic New Testament story. And adding Paul and Peter to the mix, there are at least 6 independent sources for the resurrection. 6 sane, sober eyewitnesses who refused to recant their testimony, even under the threat of death, would convict anyone of anything in any court of law, even without the additional lines of corroborating evidence that support the New Testament story. Such eyewitness testimony yields a verdict that is certain beyond a reasonable doubt. Unless you saw the event yourself, you can't be any more certain that those historical events actually occurred. Summary and conclusion. We saw from chapter 9, the New Testament documents are early and contain even earlier source material. And 2, at least 10 ancient non-Christian writers within 150 years of his life give information about Jesus, and their collective references provide a storyline consistent with the New Testament. Number 2, from this chapter we conclude that the New Testament contains at least 4 to 6 lines of early independent eyewitness written testimony. We conclude this because the major New Testament writers record the same basic events with diverging details and some unique material. They cite at least 30 real historical figures who have been confirmed by ancient non-Christian writers and various archaeological discoveries. Luke peppers the second half of Acts with at least 84 historically confirmed eyewitness details and includes several others in his gospel. Luke's proven trustworthiness affirms that of Matthew and Mark because they record the same basic story. John includes at least 59 historically confirmed or historically probable eyewitness details in his gospel. Paul and Peter provide the 5th and 6th written testimonies to the resurrection. Since this early independent eyewitness testimony is within 1 generation of the events, the New Testament events cannot be considered legendary. So there's no question that real historical events are the core of the New Testament. The bottom line is that a skeptic has to have a lot of faith to believe that the New Testament is fictional. However, there are more issues to investigate before concluding that the New Testament is definitely historically reliable. For example, how do we know that the eyewitness testimony is not exaggerated or embellished? That's the question we'll address in the next chapter. So if you would please then go back to your Little Atheist book and we'll answer these questions together. Equip number 7 on page 73. What are some of the historical crosshairs that the New Testament writers put into their accounts, and what significance do they have in confirming the message? Let's talk about some of the crosshairs. Yeah.
So like names.
Yeah, so at least 30 people have been corroborated, confirmed by archaeology and non-Christian sources that didn't have a stake in the truth of the gospel. Oh yeah, and there's nobody. When I was young, there was this whole, did Jesus really exist? Nobody. I mean, I really different people, but yeah, atheists believe that he was an actual person. There's just too much evidence to believe otherwise. So those people include here the Great, the Son and his sons, Pilate, Caiaphas, and many others have been confirmed by outside sources and by archaeology. And then what is significant about that? It's proof that the people that are being it's proof that those people existed, right? That the storyline is true. What pieces of evidence do the authors give, the authors of your Big Atheist book, give in response to the claim that the New Testament is nothing more than a historical novel? First of all, we learned in our last chapter that, and in Tim Keller, that the concept of a historical novel had not been invented yet. There was no such thing. So as C.S. Lewis said, they were either telling the truth or they invented an entire genre of novel out of thin air, right? So, but put that aside. What pieces of evidence do the authors give in response to the claim that the New Testament is nothing more than a historical novel?
They use real names.
Yep, they used real names for the main characters, right? If you read a historical novel today, they may mention in the background who was president or, somebody who was a huge, businessman, a wealthy businessman, but they aren't going to use as the main characters, real people. What else? Okay, so yeah, so there are non-Christian writers who tell the same story. Yes.
Writers endure persecution.
Right. People die for a lie. People die for lies all the time, but they believe them to be true. They believe the lie to be true. Nobody dies for a lie that they know. Why would they be persecuted and martyred for fiction? It doesn't make sense. They had nothing to gain and literally everything to lose. Then in addition to this, they are independent sources. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, all the letters, all the epistles are all independent sources. Or cribbed from someone else. And if they're not true, then the authors, all those authors of the New Testament, would have had to have a massive collusion that took place over a lot of years and a lot of territory, right? Paul was on the move all the time. John ended up in Ephesus mostly. Peter and James were in Jerusalem until Peter fled and he was on the run. And there wasn't any easy. It took months to get a letter from one place to another. How do they collude when they're all in different places at different times? That wouldn't work. There's no Zoom. Pretty sure. So then how do we know we have independent eyewitness testimony? Okay, and John in particular says, I saw this, right? So some of them stated in their writing, but he could be lying, right? Yeah. Okay, so they tell the same basic events, right? They describe the same basic events, but with divergent details. Who went to the chili cook-off last night? Obviously, I should have one. Your mom. So everybody that was there might tell a little bit different story. They might have noticed some different things about it, right? But they tell the same basic storyline. So that's true. They describe the same basic events, but with divergent details. We would expect that. If everything's exactly the same, it's like plagiarism. You can tell they got it from somewhere, right? And then the other thing is, and I think this is probably even more important, that each author includes unique material that only eyewitnesses would know. Only someone who is there would know that Jesus was sleeping with his head on a cushion, right? They give specific details. Okay, that's all we'll do for today. You can spend the rest of your time working on your study guide. If your study guide is complete, you can work on your verse mapping. The verse mapping is due on Wednesday of next week.